Welcome to my 8th book review of 2021. Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, welcome. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up if you enjoy it, and subscribe to my channel if you'd like to see more of what we do here on this channel. Plus writing tips, unboxings, book reviews, book hauls, and the occasional vlog. Before we go into today's video, I'd just like to draw your guys' attention to this awesome tank top I am wearing. It is actually designed by Kitty the Cockatoo. She is my sister and also a gaming YouTuber. Check her out, she's an amazing artist. Love her stuff. She's selling tank tops with this design and also pillowcases and things like that. I'll leave a link to it below this video. Today is my 8th book review of 2021 and it's my second non-fiction read. Today we will be discussing Stephen King's On Writing, a memoir of the craft. It's classed as a writing tips book, but at the same time it is, as he says, more of a memoir of his journey as a writer. And it is very, very interesting. Now, I wouldn't say this book has so many spoilers in it, but obviously it does have a history of his life when he was younger, when he was just starting out as a writer, and obviously a few things that happen later on. So in that way, it almost reads like a fiction on those parts, because it's like you're reading about a character, except the character is him and it is real life situations. The book is then split to go into actual writing tips, which he calls the writer's toolbox, which is little tricks and hints that he uses in his writing. But unlike most writing tip books, it doesn't come across as a factual must-do thing. It is his opinion and what works for him personally. Stephen King is more of a gardener or pantser style of writer. So if you're an architect, his style of writing may not work for you, but there are still tips in here about the publishing process, about his editing process, and also things to really try to avoid in your work, which are still useful, even if you disagree with how he believes you find your inspiration. But with that, I will read you guys the blurb. Part memoir, part masterclass by one of the best-selling authors of all time. This superb volume is a revealing and practical view of the writer's craft, comprising the basic tools of the trade every writer must have. King's advice is grounded in his vivid memories from childhood through his emergence as a writer, from his struggling early career to his widely reported near-fatal accident in 1999, and how the inextricable link between writing and living spurred his recovery. Like a lot of books, this has so many good reviews. It has 2 reviews on the back, and also a lot of people have reviewed this book in the past. Up to about page 106, it is mostly a memoir of Stephen King's earlier life and him starting out as a writer, and makes me feel so guilty that as a child he was handing work into magazines. Yes, he was getting rejected, but he was still handing in work to magazines. I didn't even know that was an option in life. Now, this is obviously written and came out in 2000, so it is a little bit behind in today's publishing world in terms of there are no longer as many magazines as there used to be. It's not always the way in anymore. But if you can find a magazine which does publish stories that are in your desired genre, then definitely go for it. But there are a lot less for fantasy and science fiction than there used to be. On page 34, by the time he was 14, he had a collection of rejection letters. It's just not fair. I say it's not fair. It's his own ambition, and he really did this. As a 14-year-old child, he was this geared towards being a writer that he had so many rejection letters nailed to his wall. That is dedication to the craft beyond anything. On page 104, King's description of toxic masculinity is so on point and quite painful to read. He couldn't release his feelings in any kind of good way which would help him to work through them and get them out of his system, and instead he had to be this tough man who never cries and never falters. And it's so sad to read how this happened to him, but it's also really good to read how it happened and to hear his side and how he also knows that it is bad, that toxic masculinity has to stop, and men need to feel like they can talk about things and work through it. It is not weak to seek help. On page 106, he also goes into his alcoholism and drug addiction, which again, it's so brutally honest and it's such an insight into a world that I personally haven't been in. By page 113, we're on to the craft of writing itself and his opinions on what writing is, and it's really interesting how he sees it as a form of telepathy. In one of my previous videos, are you an architect or a gardener? These are the general, well-accepted terms for your outline and process and your writing style. But Stephen King has his own version. He almost counts it as being an archaeologist. He finds a fossil and he says that his job is to unveil its story. That's a really interesting way to look at it. It's also interesting how he thinks it is telepathic, in that technically me reading his story now in 2021 is telepathically him telling me the story, and he wrote it in the 90s and it wasn't released until 2000. It's sort of a romantic way to look at it. I wouldn't say it's telepathy, but it is a form of communication, and it is a way of almost talking to the people who are in the past or are dead because they're still there. It's like when you listen to Queen and you're hearing Freddie Mercury's voice, you're hearing Queen when he was alive, and it's not really time travel, but at the same time you kind of are. It's an interesting question. I really like his description of it. If you pick up this book, if you read nothing else, please read from page 135. I'm going to say it again, 135. Read it. It is his chapters on show versus tell. I've made a video about this recently, and it's something that as a writer you really, in modern day writing, need to understand. I'm going to put a link above this so you can watch that if you're interested in learning more about the show versus telling, but please read page 135 on Stephen King's view on show versus telling. Page 139. I have a bit of a problem with this. All the way through this book, Stephen King refers to writers and everyone around it as he. Now, partly this is because of the era that he was a developing writer. It was mostly in he, and a lot of the female writers were writing under male pen names in order to get into the industry. But also he says that his muse is male, which the muses were female, but he even admits he struggles to write from a female's point of view because he is not female. He's writing to his strengths, and we can forgive that. That does make sense. If you're a female, you might write from a female character's point of view because you understand it more. But on page 139, he begins his process. It's almost like at this point was when the everything being male and equality really came into play. This is when it started becoming an issue. So he's like, oh, you know, it's almost like his publisher said, look, you can't use he all the way through. You have to involve women. And he's going, all right, he/she, he/she. Herself, himself, he, self. Oh, I got so sick of reading he/she. Now, this book was written in the 90s, so we can forgive, you know, it wasn't grammatically allowed to use the term they. But, I mean, he did a chapter on show versus tell. He could just say writers, the writer, the reader, your muse. Why does it have to have a gender? There doesn't need to be a gender on these things. A writer doesn't need to be male or female. They are a writer. That is not a genderized thing. Still, there's a better way to be gender neutral. On page 175, King has a complete contradiction to what he says on page 109. So 109 is when he's talking about the alcoholism and the drug addiction, how it's not conducive to writing or the creative process, and anyone who says otherwise is lying and they are just addicted. And yet, on page 175, he says that him quitting smoking is the reason he now writes slower. Smoking and tobacco is a drug. It is a drug addiction. It might not be a class A drug, but it is a drug addiction, and you are addicted to it. Smoking does not help writing. It doesn't help the creative process. It just makes you ill. For me, that was kind of infuriating to read just because he is contradicting himself in the same book. But as he is addicted, obviously, to smoking, as he was addicted to alcohol and drugs, at the time he was writing this was possibly still in that mindset. And the mindsets he's explained, you know, about when he was an alcoholic, that having alcohol in the house is almost like a sin. Like, what do you mean you can only drink one? If it's in the house, you have to drink it all, which is why he had to pour it all down the sink. It's something that someone who's not addicted cannot understand. For me, it's like, well, it's in the house, it can sit there. So it is really interesting to explore how this all made Stephen King feel, and I would link this contradiction to that addiction, but it was a bit infuriating to read. On page 203, there's a really nice quote I enjoyed, which is, "Description begins in the writer's mind but ends in the reader's." This links to the give them 2 + 2, not 4, which again is in my show versus tell video. And then on page 266, this comes into play again when he describes how on one of his rejection slips there was a note which said second draft equals first draft minus 10%. In my review of the betrayals, I talk about how refreshing it is that Bridget Collins says how hard it is as a writer to find out that 60,000 words of your book are not needed. But this is the truth, and it links into the show versus tell. It links into the info dumps. People don't want a meandering story anymore. They want to get in there and enjoy it and get to the points. So if you can take anything from this book, it has to be the show versus tell page, and also this idea of second draft equals first draft minus 10%. The third thing I would definitely take away from this book is getting rid of words with ly at the end. If you read the sentences without them, it is so much better. And again, links into the show versus telling. The words you use make a big difference. From page 329, I loved seeing this raw version of Stephen King's writing. It is A, uplifting because we all know our first drafts kind of suck, and B, good to practice. What I would recommend that you do if you read this book is read the first draft of King's work and edit it yourself. Make marks in the book, show what you would get rid of, what you would change, and then read Stephen King's second version with those edits scrolled on top and see if you agree. See if there's things that you liked or disliked that he didn't. See if you got everything that he got when he would get rid of things. It is a good practice exercise and also shows how much of the book you've taken in until this point. Can you find all of his showing versus telling? Can you find all the ly words, things like that? Overall, I would really recommend this book. I would read it not so much as a guide to writing, but as a history and autobiography of a writer, where you will find useful tips in there, but also the most interesting bit is the process he personally goes through and his life and sort of what you can try to expect and goals to get into your mind. You know, you need to write and collect these rejection letters. It teaches you to accept these rejections in a positive and mindful way. It's also an insight into alcoholism, drug addiction, and toxic masculinity as well. If you have writerly friends, I would recommend buying this to them. If you are a writer, I'd recommend reading it. If you are just a reader, but you want to read about the life of a writer and what they go through to make these books that you love to read, I would also recommend reading it just for that purpose. It teaches you so much about what writers are thinking about, what they're going through, what goes through their minds to create these books that we all then love to read. Also, the last point I'd like to say is you don't have to agree with everything he says in this book. As I say, I believe he is a gardener, and if you're an architect, you might not want to just pick out a story and start to write it in the closed door. You might want to obviously plan it first, but his idea of the closed door and the open door is a really interesting one, and it does link into, you know, you don't necessarily want to share your world with people until it's ready, because they're going to ask questions and then you're going to be bogged down with all the, oh, what if, I need to do that, instead of finishing the book. Overall, I would give this book 9 out of 10 stars. And thank you guys so much for watching. If you like what you see, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up. If you'd like to see more of my work, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell if you'd like to see it as soon as I upload. You can also follow me on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, or Tumblr. I post general bookish pictures as well as my writing tips, unboxings, and bookish goodies on there. And thanks for watching, guys. Bye!